Okay, and we are at our last presentation of the afternoon, and it'll be an interesting one. It's very timely. Dave Briggs is here from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. He is the local and regional water system manager there, and he's going to be talking to us about their recent experience with a rim fire. And David manages the potable water system and high-pressure fire suppression water system at SFPUC, and he manages his Hetchy regional water system. Dave, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. And yes, I'm the last talk of the day, so this will not go late. I'll make it as interesting as possible for you. I've enjoyed, thanks for the invitation, by the way, and I've definitely enjoyed hearing all the talks today. This will be different. A lot of the topics today, they've all been different too, but long-term strategies, campaigns that take years, research. This is the event that I'm going to talk about is encapsulated into a 2-week period. It was an emergency, and normally my days are not always like this. These 2 weeks, this 2-week period is not always this way, thankfully. This is this 2-week emergency that you cannot sustain as an organization. We're generally speaking a utility. We're not. We don't deal with emergencies on a day-to-day basis. So this event was very taxing for us, and it was thankfully more or less over after 2 weeks. If you're not familiar with our system and why a wildfire in the Sierra Nevada created such a problem for us, let me just review some basic things for you here. Our water system, 85% of our supply originates from Yosemite National Park. We don't own that land. We have an easement from the federal government to build a dam there and export water. We don't control much there other than our immediate operations. It's about 165 miles away from San Francisco, at least as the pipelines run. In this particular event, and this is something that we've heard today a couple times mentioned by a couple of the speakers about how do you plan for an outage if your primary source of water, be it the Delta or the Colorado River or the LA Aqueduct, if you were to lose it, what would you do? How much lead time do you have? What are your alternatives? That is generally the life that I was living for this 2-week period. It's going to be different depending on if you're MWD or State Water Project or the CVP or what have you. But I will outline that a little bit for you as to why this developed into an emergency situation for us. Luckily, everything was fine, but that for 2 weeks there, I wasn't sleeping too well. The other thing to keep in mind is we have wildfires all the time. Why was this a big deal? We have a filtration avoidance system. That's unique. Okay, if that's unfamiliar to you as a water treatment system, the water comes out of Yosemite National Park. We adjust the pH a little bit. Inline, as the water's flowing through the pipe, we add a disinfectant. That's pretty much it. We do not have a filter plant. So if we were to lose our supply at Hetchy, this is the middle of the summer, keep in mind, so our demand is at its highest. If we were to lose our largest source of water in the middle of the summer with very little notice, we're going to have a difficult time meeting the supply needs for our 2.5 million customers in the Bay Area with that short of a notice in the middle of summer. I'll get into that in a little bit. The nature of the water quality problem that could have, but did not, could have developed in Hetchy Reservoir is not something that would have gone away in a few days or a few hours. That was the other problem. So not only do we not have a lot of lead time, but if water quality, I'll get into what this means and how it manifests itself or how it could have manifested itself. If the worst case scenario did develop in Hetchy Reservoir, it would have lasted months. We've had turbidity problems in the reservoir before. Turbidity is generally the one parameter that guides all of our filtration avoidance operations out of Hetchy Reservoir. If turbidity rises above 5 NTU, we cannot use that water. It's non-potable as far as our permit is concerned. That's generally, and turbidity could be caused by a lot of factors, runoff, contamination from ash in this case, et cetera. But that was the parameter that we were watching most closely. So why was this a big deal? This is where most of our water comes from. We had very little notice. The problem, if it did manifest itself in the worst possible way, could have lasted for months. The filtration avoidance system, probably not something that would have factored into customers, the rest of the state of California and most of the Western Hemisphere that generally does not have filtration avoidance. You run this water through a filter plant, by and large, you would have been fine. We didn't have that luxury. So just 4 things I want to hit on here in one way, shape, or form. I want to talk about the coordinated emergency response. We are not a firefighting utility. We deal with it. Wildfire is something that we're familiar with. We own 60,000 acres in the Bay Area, and we have an easement in Yosemite National Park for the water supplies there. Wildfire is part of what we do, but generally we are not the lead dog in that, as you might have guessed. Contingency planning for the water supply. That was my job. That's what I was busy doing. I want to touch on the communications aspect of this. Very, very active. I don't know where most of you are probably Southern California based, in the media coverage down here probably was intense, extremely intense in the Bay Area, and it was a big part of what we were doing, trying to stay in front of all the messaging. The recovery phase, assuming time is not running out, I'll go over this briefly, where we are now, the financial implications, the reimbursement opportunities we're seeking right now, and a couple other factors involved with that. In summary, I'm going to hit most of this as I go along, so I'm not going to dwell on this slide here. But again, just wanted to make sure that the table is set here as to why this was an emergency for us. It wasn't, when I get into the water supply options that we had available to us, it was not straightforward, and there was a lot of concern in the Bay Area. Again, I mentioned that all of this was encapsulated, most of the intensity of this event was encapsulated in about 2 weeks. And here's just a chronology of the run-up of various disaster declarations. The PUC, San Francisco PUC, we can declare our own disasters, believe it or not. That loosens up some of our administrative and financial constraints. The city of San Francisco followed suit a day later. State of California declared disasters, I believe, in several counties in the rural areas, as well as the city of San Francisco and county. August 23rd was probably the worst day. Why don't I get into how the fire proceeded, and I'll elaborate more on that chronology in a second. The emergency response. This is another big point. I'm going to hit on a lot of this as well in terms of all the stakeholder groups that we were trying to keep informed, all the people that we were talking to. Overall, the fire response was not dictated by the city of San Francisco. It was led by the state of California, CAL FIRE. As the fire started in a state forest, it then propagated eastward into a federal forest. The feds took over at some point. There were thousands of people fighting this fire. We were one of the stakeholders, but I can tell you right now, we were not at the table designing the tactics of where the 3,000 people were deployed every day and where the resources that were brought to bear fed all over the country that came in. We had teams from Florida, had never heard of Hetchy Reservoir, didn't care. They were there, they got their instructions, and they weren't coming from us. But on a daily, so that was the fire command structure was very typical. CAL FIRE, U.S. Forest Service, they're at the top of the pyramid. Various local jurisdictions below them. We were at the bottom of the pyramid. Within San Francisco, we had our own ICS structure where we were talking to various city departments and city hall, et cetera, as we were sort of shadowing this ICS structure that was going on in Tuolumne and Stanislaus County. On a daily basis for this 2-week period, generally overnight, the military was flying drone aircraft, infrared, getting fire data for the people who were fighting the fire. That application of the military, I believe, is not typical, and I think it's something new that is being interjected in California and the western United States right now. The fire was very thick, the smoke. It was in a canyon. They had no other way of getting intel of where the fire was except through infrared flights at night. It was very difficult to fly any aircraft because it was so smoky. The drone information that was gathered overnight and allowed the tactics to be set by the fire response team at around 6 in the morning when the turnover occurred with their shifts. Out of that, we had a member of the San Francisco Fire Department generally embedded in the fire response team. If it weren't for that, we would know as much as you would know about what was going on up there. Very, very little. I'll come back to that. Having this embedded veteran of a wildfire, he had some wildfire experience, but generally this individual was stationed in downtown San Francisco. He was embedded in the team, and he was calling us on satellite phone, telling us what was going on. We met with him or had a conference call with him roughly 7:30 in the morning. So this is the daily routine for 2 weeks. We get the fire information about 6:30. We hear from our fire rep at about 7:30. We had a PUC call at about 8. Then we talked to all the departments in San Francisco at 9. We had conference calls with our customers every day at 3. Probably anywhere between half a dozen and a dozen media interviews all day long. And then we had wrap-up phone calls at 5 and 6 and 7 o'clock at night. Yeah, this is not my day job, so I don't know if I mentioned that. I kind of covered this. Generally, I'll keep going here. So the fire's progression, hopefully some of these color contours are visible to you where you're sitting. From August 20th to August 23rd, the fire was moving very rapidly. At the end of the day, I don't know the final statistics, but I believe this was the 4th largest fire in the state's history. It was doubling and tripling in size in these first few days. This was the worst week. And first it was 12 miles away from Hetchy Reservoir, which you see there on the right. Then it was 9, then it was 6, then it was 3. And ultimately, you see in this photograph here, it actually reached the reservoir. We had strike teams staffed at Camp Mather, which is San Francisco's. It's not run by the PUC, but it's another city department runs that as a city recreational facility. We had staff there, strike teams that were literally protecting that and surrounding it. Camp Mather did not burn. We have structures at the dam as well, and we had strike teams there that were stationed. Sometimes they could not get out, so they would hunker down and wait for the area to be clear. This wildfire would burn through a canyon. 2 days later, it would come back. So we had intel that some of our structures were okay, and then everybody thought everything was fine in that area. Oh, the fire went through. 2 days later, it came back and burned it. So things were very, very unpredictable. But as this fire was propagating east, the anxiety level was increasing. We did not know. We knew very, very, very little about the condition of the reservoir. Our instrumentation at the dam itself was dead very early on in this event, so we had. Oh, did I mention that water operations remained continuous the whole time? We were drawing 300 MGD from this reservoir, 250 feet below the water surface continuously. We had no instrumentation at the dam whatsoever. We started to get our first water quality signal, probably, about 7 miles downstream of here is when we got our first glimpse of the water quality. And we were generally watching turbidity. So we stayed online the whole time. This was September 2nd. So a couple days prior to this, when things were still rapidly moving east, our customers were getting very nervous. City Hall was getting very nervous. And on one day, as I was dealing with all of the fire tactics in the morning, I got trooped over to City Hall to make sure the acting mayor and supervisors were under control. They turned to me and they said, "Are we okay? Our customers and the residents of San Francisco are going to wake up tomorrow. They're going to see this on the news. They're going to see our reservoirs burning. They're going to see all these stories about ash falling on the reservoir, and they're going to assume the worst. What do we tell them?" And I said, "I think we're going to be fine." And the city manager said, "I don't want to hear you say 'I think.' I want to hear you say 'I know.'" And so I paused for a little bit. I took a deep breath, and I said, "I know we'll be fine." So I knew we'd be fine. After that meeting, large press conference with probably 40 reporters, including the BBC. I get out of that. My phone rings. The CFO calls me up to his office because S&P and Moody's are on the phone, and they're reviewing our rating requirement. They see this on the news. People on the East Coast and Wall Street, they're seeing this, and they're looking at a bond issuance that we may be doing in a month or two, and they're considering cutting our rating. So that was all on one day. This is infrared data here. Again, burn severity, I asked several times, what does that mean? Burn severity, the nearest best explanation I could have is that this is essentially infrared data of heat. So the green is either underbrush burning or very little burning. The canopies of trees, probably not. No torching, as they say in the the wildfire business. So green is very light to little. The important thing to show here is the blue boundary of our watershed, because this was what we kept going back with our customer messaging, with the press, with everybody who was concerned about this, is we kept saying the watershed is fine. And it by and large was, even though I don't know when this data was made available to us, but we had, because it was so smoky and we had very little data to go by, but when this data did become available, this was really the day that we could all relax. The fire was not propagating much eastward at this point, and if you've ever been to Hetchy and you've stood on the dam and you've looked east, this is a canyon. The blue line right there is 2,000 feet above the river. It is extremely steep, and it's more or less granite. So even though there is some red there, I mean, it was completely inconsequential. The two water quality concerns we had were massive ash deposition on the reservoir, creating a turbidity problem that would then render our filtration avoidance supply unusable. That was going to be a problem in the near term. The long-term issue was once the rains and the runoff happened, whether it be late fall or early spring, would we have another turbidity problem caused by soil erosion, et cetera. So both of these things, and they both would have resulted in turbidity. But this kind of information, once it finally became available, and what you're not showing here is that this is, I think I have the statistics somewhere in the slides, this is an inconsequential part of our watersheds, 1 or 2%. This was very useful. I wanted to get into the contingency planning real quick because during the first few days of this event, we didn't know what was going to happen. We were fairly certain that even if fire had swept through the dam and everything near it, which it more or less did, we were nearly certain that nothing was going to burn up being concrete and buried and metal, that we would continue to be able to draw water from this reservoir even if fire raced through the dam, which it more or less did. We did have a strike team there protecting some of the cottages, but they couldn't protect the whole watershed. So this is a very, very, very busy slide, and I apologize. Some of this is definitely esoteric and relevant to the Bay Area, but just let me try to express the visual here. So one of the things that I was doing to calm everybody down, the blue line is our demand, or at least our forecasted demand, and what these bar charts are intended to depict here is our alternative water supplies if we were to lose the reservoir. The first two big stacks there are our local filter plants that filter local supply. And stacking those two on top of each other, if we were to lose Hetchy, we could, in theory, ramp both filter plants up full blast and meet demand because the red and the light green there are slightly higher than that blue line. Should also mention that several times today, conservation and demand has come up in many of the talks. We're 20% below where we were 10 years ago. So if this happened 10 years ago, that line would have been, the blue line would have been roughly 340, approaching 350. So this would have been a dramatically different event to deal with. Beyond the two large bars there, we get into essentially intertie agreements with our regional partners. There are some strings with that, and they didn't exactly get a lot of lead notice as well. And summertime, ability to deliver that water in the summertime is not exactly firm, but this was making me very nervous. This was our plan B, but this was going to come with a lot of stress and a lot of headaches if we had to go to plan B, mainly because there really wasn't a good plan C at this point. So you can see if we had a problem, you can just do the math yourself there. Look at that. If we had a dramatic problem with one of our filter plants, which those of you in the business know that's not beyond realm of possibility, if we did have a problem with one of our filter plants, you can see what we would have been left with. So let me talk about the communication side a bit. The communication aspect was challenging for a lot of reasons. One is it was scary, okay? Two, we weren't in control of the situation. Even the 3,000 people fighting the fire weren't in control of the situation. And we weren't even, again, high on that pyramid in the ICS pyramid. And then three, the media was extremely active. And this, I'm not exactly sure where this appeared. I saw it on the internet once. I don't know if it ever appeared in print media or if it was simply just online. But there was an AP reporter that was embedded with CAL FIRE. We hadn't even seen this. I went on the internet one night, and this was the first view I had of our reservoir. It was on the internet looking at this photographer from the AP, and we didn't even know about this. So there were things getting out, and plus the headline that I don't know if the photographer came up with the headline, but somebody did. This is not ash raining. This is smoke. But that's the kind of stuff that was out there that was creating a lot of anxiety with everybody, and we were chasing this. I think our communications people did a fantastic job getting things back in the bag, staying on point, staying consistent and persistent, and keeping everybody under control. But this was some of the stuff that we were fighting. I think it also came up today if most people don't know where their water comes from. Yeah, that's true everywhere. This came out in the Chronicle. By August 28th, this was a few days after peak anxiety level, so I did find this funny, but probably would not have found it funny if that came out on August 23rd. Just goes to show you what difference a few days can make. It's hard to see, probably, but some of these rocks are pink. Fire retardant was one of the other issues we were grappling with. Our watershed is high. The pristine nature of our watershed is highly, highly, highly valued. We would lose our filtration. We're this close to losing filtration avoidance in the Hetchy watershed. So things like contamination or unsanitary conditions in Sonora Meadows, which is far upstream, or fire retardant or whatever. These are the kind of things that could make a difficult job even more difficult. By the way, keeping filtration avoidance saves us probably about $200 million a year in water treatment costs. So the fire retardant question, do we allow fire retardant in the watershed and keep the fire in check, or do we let it burn and keep the watershed pure? So we grappled with this for a long time. Another thing that came up that made it even harder was the fire retardant itself is a trade-protected formula. So we had to sign confidentiality agreements just to learn what was in the damn stuff. At the end of the day, we did not use any. So I just want to repeat that. We did not use any in the Hetchy watershed. We didn't have to because as we were grappling with this and it was so challenging, we were having a great internal struggle over this, the fire started to slow down, and so it kind of became a moot point after a while anyway. So here, next is just a series of photographs that I think I'm going to skip through. This is the ash deposition, by the way. Not much. Of course, we didn't know this. I mean, if you saw, a lot of the wind direction was headed northeast, which was great because we were due east of the fire. So the fire was headed towards us, but most of the smoke was actually heading north. So people in Tahoe were having a probably worse time than we were. This is going to be hard to see, but when we finally did get access to the reservoir, which I think was the day before Labor Day weekend, we got some data out of the reservoir that we were desperately what we were trying to sample is the surface layer. We wanted to know what that first 10 feet of the reservoir had experienced in terms of water quality contamination. We looked over the side of the dam. We could see that propeller in the bottom of the boat. We knew we were probably in good shape. The profile of the reservoir quickly confirmed that the reservoir was just fine. So you can see here the granite walls of the canyon. There's not much to burn there anyway. So another reason why we felt we were in relatively good shape. If Tuolumne, I realize you probably don't know the geography that well, but Tuolumne Meadows, which is several miles upstream, and there's a lot of wooded area there. If that had burned, it would have been a bigger problem. I think I just want to end with some of the financial aspects of this, and then I can take any questions. And I want to skip forward to that part. And I'm going to actually skip to the last slide because I think that's probably a good platform for me to... Oh, it got cut. It's in my handout, but all right. Financially, it's in the hard copy? Okay, good. So the rating agencies were satisfied quickly that we had things under control and we were not going to lose our primary source of revenue. So that problem got solved pretty quickly. We updated our insurance policy about 5 years ago by updating the book value of all of our assets. So many of the things that did burn and were destroyed in this fire power transmission lines and some damage to our powerhouses, will be, there's probably going to be a good 85% cost recovery of that through our insurance policy. FEMA and the state will hopefully reimburse many of our costs related to fighting the fire and responding to the emergency itself, and there's some tabular data there. That cost was a lot smaller, but we will get some cost recovery because there was a disaster declaration. You also note in that table, and I don't have the slide, if you look, it's at the very last slide in your handout. You'll notice there that some of those costs for recovering the assets and making the repairs are related to roads, a very expensive line item in there. We don't have an insurance policy for roads. A lot of that is civil engineering, slope stability, truck and haul. That stuff is not covered by anything. And not only that, we're the primary stakeholder in many of these areas, so we don't have any partners over there who are going to be leading the recovery and the repair of some of these roads. So that's another reason why we're probably going to be paying full freight for that. We had enough cash on hand. Those of you that have been through this before, you incur all these costs. You're going to be paying these people to fix all this stuff. Insurance, FEMA, that check's not going to come in the mail for a long time. So another aspect of this is you have enough cash reserves to pay all this and not have to raise rates in the interim. So we're okay there. The power enterprise side of the PUC, I failed to mention this at the beginning. The power enterprise side of the house, they lost generation and they lost transmission out of here. That was mostly a financial impact. The city of San Francisco itself, we don't operate and own the distribution of power in the Bay Area. That's PG&E. We essentially deliver it to the grid. So it was never, as a utility, it was never an issue about losing power. It's just losing money. The water, of course, we have our own conveyance, and the loss of water was predominantly the source of the stress. No one out there was particularly concerned about us losing several millions of dollars in lost power revenue. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. Any questions?
You recently had a little run-in with the Save Hetchy folks a while before the fire. I'm wondering what their posture was during all of this. Do you anticipate that they may start to challenge you on the road reconstruction and things like that?
Yeah, so this is always a tough thing to talk about in public. Yeah, they were not very noticeable during this emergency, which we appreciated. And in terms of them coming into play with our recovery of roads, no, I do not anticipate. Most of the damage was west of the dam anyway. I don't think they'll enter into that conversation. So Don Pedro is owned and operated by MID and TID, Modesto and Turlock irrigation districts. We pay for a share of the operation of that facility, but we don't hold title to it. The bulk of the fire damage, both the intensity and the erosion potential, is between our dam and Don Pedro. So they're going to have some problems dealing with turbidity, but they're not operating a filtration avoidance water supply, so it's going to be a little bit of a different issue for them. But yeah, they've already. And I should also mention, I skipped over this in the interest of time, there's a big effort right now to deal with erosion potential before the rains hit. It's in the slides. There's some information on that.
Were any conservation activities initiated at the beginning of the problem just in case?
Water conservation?
Mm-hmm.
No. I was sure that we'd be okay.
Yeah, just a point of information. When this particular incident started, I was following up on my own, and the first reading I did, which was very beneficial to me, was when Mount St. Helens erupted. Some of the lakes nearby were also affected, and how they took that entire case study. And at least I convinced myself that, hey, the situation in your case was not all that bad. Looking into what they had. Because they had shallow reservoirs. And I was just wondering whether you folks are thinking about studying it and applying it to your case for future use, you know.
Yeah, I think we didn't have a lot of experience with rates of ash deposition, how that would translate into turbidity 250 feet below. Right. The reservoir is stratified, technical term, very stably stratified right now, or it was. End of September, early October, the whole reservoir turned over and mixed. So we're looking at the whole dynamics of what, and I've heard that depending on the intensity of the fire, you can get simple carbon deposition from ash, but if it gets very, very, very intense, you can also get some metal deposition as well. Some heavy metals can come out because they may be in the rock, and that could get into the smoke, silica, et cetera. So, no, we and then plus we operate a filtration avoidance system. So you throw all these areas of science together. We were looking for any analog we possibly could to learn, you know, as this situation was developing, and yeah, we'll definitely do that moving forward as well. So it's a cross-disciplinary issue. It's right. not something you can just call a professor at a university and get a technical paper on.
Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions for Dave? Well, Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fascinating. So that concludes our workshop. Before closing it, Janine, I want to see if you have anything that you'd like to say here at the end.
I just want to offer my thanks again to NWRI for putting together this and Jeff and staff doing it.
Well, thank you, Janine. I'd like to thank Gina and Brandy and Roxana out front. They're the ones that did all the heavy lifting. And Janine, it's been great to partner with you again this year. It was a fantastic program. We heard about a lot of different aspects associated with drought, but that's the nature of this beast. There's a lot of moving parts related to it. I do want to mention that you just had black and white copies in your books. We will post the color slides on the internet, and we can let people know when that's out. But I want to thank all the speakers. It was great having you come down and present. I want to thank all of you for coming and attending. So many of you stayed to the end. We do appreciate it. Thanks so much.